The mysterious arrival. Joseph wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting as he worked on the old starship's exposed circuitry. The harsh lights of the new Chicago spaceport's hangar cast long shadows, making the ship's scars and dents look even more prominent. He reached for his tool set, muttering to himself, "Just a little more. Come on, work with me here." As he adjusted a frayed wire, a spark leaped out, singing his hand. "Ah, great," he muttered, shaking out the sting. Just then, he heard a chuckle from behind. "Trouble again, Joe." It was his friend and co-worker, Mike, who leaned against a nearby workbench, amused. Joseph forced a grin. "Yeah, this shit's out to get me. Every single time." He shrugged, retrieving his fallen tool and turning back to the panel. But as he did, his elbow brushed against an odd crystal embedded in the ship's control panel. A low hum filled the air, and the crystal began to glow with an eerie blue light. Mike," Joseph said, backing away slowly, "you ever see anything like this?" Before Mike could respond, the air around them began to ripple like a mirage. With a blinding flash and a rush of wind, a swirling vortex appeared in front of them, filling the hangar with a powerful energy that sent tools clattering to the floor. Joseph shielded his eyes, barely able to process what was happening. When he looked again, he found himself face to face with an astonishing figure, a woman with cerulean blue skin, clad in a strange, sleek suit that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, scanned the hangar in wide-eyed confusion before settling on Joseph. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice both melodic and firm, tinged with a slight accent that Joseph couldn't place. Earth, New Chicago, to be exact," he stammered, trying to process the surreal situation. He watched her face contort with shock, her violet eyes widening. "Earth," she whispered, more to herself. That's impossible." Before Joseph could ask what she meant, alarms blared throughout the hangar, and red lights flashed ominously. "Hey lady, I don't know who you are, but we need to move, now." Without waiting for her response, Joseph grabbed her hand and led her toward a nearby maintenance hatch. They sprinted through the maze of equipment, Joseph glancing back to see security officers storming into the hangar, their weapons drawn. "Stop right there," one of the officers shouted, but Joseph was already pulling the woman through the maintenance tunnel, moving as fast as they could until the sound of pursuit faded. After several tense minutes, they emerged into a deserted alleyway outside the spaceport. Both were out of breath, and Joseph took a moment to lean against a wall, his pulse racing. The woman watched him with a guarded expression, her stance tense. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice softening. "I didn't mean to get you involved. My name is Istara, but everyone calls me Ist." Joseph nodded, intrigued. "I'm Joseph. And, well, I've had a pretty weird day, so meeting you isn't the strangest part." He tried to smile, hoping to lighten the mood. "So, Ist, who's after you?" Her face grew grim. "Zorg, the most powerful tyrant in the galaxy. I was his property," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I served him as his personal guard and enforcer, bound by a life I didn't choose." Joseph's heart twisted with a mix of sympathy and outrage. "That sounds awful, but if you got out, why come to Earth?" Ist looked away, her gaze distant. Earth was supposed to be safe. It's off limits, according to the Alliance's laws. I took a huge risk with a stolen teleportation device. I didn't even know if I'd survive the trip. But now, he's likely found out where I am. Just then, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Joseph and Ist turned to see a massive shadow falling over the city's skyline. A ship, larger than anything Joseph had ever seen, loomed in the sky, its dark hull gleaming menacingly under the night sky. Ist paled. "No, he's here." "We have to move," Joseph said, grabbing her hand once more. He led her through the chaotic streets, where people were beginning to panic at the sight of the ominous vessel overhead. It wasn't long before a powerful, booming voice echoed through the city, amplified by speakers or some unknown technology. "Citizens of Earth," the voice declared, filled with malice. "I am Zorg. You are harboring a fugitive of the highest order. Return her to me, or face the consequences." Panic erupted in the streets as people began to flee in every direction. Joseph tightened his grip on Ist's hand and pulled her into a narrow side street, his mind racing. "Is there anywhere safe?" Ist asked, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. Joseph nodded, leading her toward his tiny apartment on the outskirts of New Chicago. Once they reached his building, he keyed in his access code, and they slipped inside unnoticed. The apartment was small and cluttered, but it was safe for the moment. As Ist entered, she scanned the room, taking in Joseph's collection of old Earth artifacts, some salvaged tech, and books scattered across the table. "You have an interesting place," she said, her voice softening. He offered a modest smile. "Thanks. It's not much, but it's home. Here." He handed her a glass of water. "You look like you could use this." Ist took it gratefully, sipping slowly. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them settling as they tried to catch their breath. Finally, Joseph broke the silence. "So, what's your plan now?" Ist shook her head. "I don't know. Running from Zor was all I had planned. I never thought I'd make it this far." Joseph leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Look, I don't know much about this Zor guy, but he's not going to get you, not while you're here. We can figure something out." Before Ist could respond, the building shook with another tremor, and an ominous red glow filtered through the window. They rushed to the window, staring in horror as Zorg's ship descended closer to the city, hovering over the skyline with an aura of sheer menace. "Joseph, I don't want you to get hurt because of me," Ist said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Zorg is relentless. He won't stop until he has me back under his control." Joseph looked her straight in the eyes, determination radiating from him. "Then he'll have to go through me first." Ist's expression softened, a hint of gratitude breaking through her fear. She placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle yet powerful. "Thank you, Joseph, for everything." As they watched the ship, Joseph knew that life as he knew it was over. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose, a fierce, protective urge that he couldn't ignore. No matter what lay ahead, he was ready to stand by Ist's side. The battle was just beginning. A desperate plan. The tremors continued to shake the building, each one feeling like a countdown to their discovery. Joseph and Ist stayed low by the window, watching Zorg's ominous ship hover above the city like a predator ready to pounce. In the streets below, a stream of terrified citizens fled in every direction, their panicked shouts blending with the blaring sirens that filled the air. Ist clenched her fists, her jaw tight with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I thought I could outrun him. I didn't think he'd risk breaking the Alliance's rules just to come after me here." Joseph glanced at her, frowning. "You really think some intergalactic law is going to stop a guy like Zorg? He sounds like he doesn't care about anything but getting what he wants." Ist let out a bitter laugh. "You're right. Zorg doesn't care about laws. He believes he owns the galaxy, and he sees me as his property." Her voice wavered, the weight of her words filling the room with a heavy silence. Joseph's hands balled into fists. He'd never been one to back down from a fight, but this was on a scale he'd never imagined. Still, he couldn't shake the image of Ist standing alone against this monstrous tyrant, a mere pawn in Zorg's twisted game. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. "Then we'll have to be smarter than him," Joseph said, a spark of determination lighting up his eyes. Ist's gaze met his, a flicker of hope shining in her violet eyes. "What do you mean?" Joseph pushed himself off the floor and began pacing the room, his mind racing. If Zorg's willing to risk coming here, he must have some way of covering his tracks, right? If we can find a way to signal the Alliance and expose his presence here, maybe they'll come after him. At the very least, it'll buy us some time. Ist's face softened, admiration evident in her expression. "That's a bold plan. But the Alliance isn't known for acting quickly, especially when it comes to protecting planets like Earth. We're considered expendable. Joseph's brow furrowed as he tried to think. Then we'll have to give them a reason to act fast. He moved to his small desk, rummaging through the clutter until he found a battered, outdated communicator. This might not be much, but if I can amplify the signal through the port's satellite network, it should be strong enough to reach someone in the Alliance. Ist looked at him with a mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. You think you can pull that off? Joseph grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. I've patched together enough broken tech in my life. This won't be the hardest thing I've done. Suddenly, a loud knocking sounded at the door, shattering the moment. Both of them froze, and Ist's face went pale. Joseph, you in there? Came the familiar voice of Mike, Joseph's co-worker. Man, we've got to talk. Joseph motioned for Ist to stay hidden, then went to the door, cautiously opening it just enough to see Mike's anxious face peering through. Mike, now's really not a good time. Joseph started, but Mike cut him off, pushing his way inside. Joe, are you seeing what's going on out there? That massive ship in the sky. They're saying some kind of alien dictator's hunting a fugitive. There's a huge bounty on anyone with information. His eyes darted around the room, widening when he spotted Ist, who had stepped out from behind the table. Mike's jaw dropped. You're the one he's after, aren't you? Ist met his gaze, her face resolute. Yes, but I'm not going back to him. Not ever. Mike swallowed hard, looking from Ist to Joseph, then back again. Joe, you know this is insane, right? You're going to risk everything, for what? A stranger. Joseph's voice was steady. She's not just a stranger. And I can't stand by while someone like Zorg thinks he can do whatever he wants, especially not here. Besides, Ist deserves a chance to be free. Mike looked at his friend, visibly torn. You're a good man, Joe, but you're talking about going up against someone who could level this whole city, and you're willing to put yourself in the middle of that. Joseph's eyes were firm, unwavering. Yes. After a long pause, Mike let out a heavy sigh. All right then. If you're crazy enough to do this, I'm in too. What do you need? Joseph smiled, relief flooding through him. First, we need to get this communicator working, and then we're going to need a way to buy some time. Mike nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. I can set up a diversion near the spaceport, keep Zorg's goons distracted while you two handle things here. As Mike prepared to leave, Ist stepped forward, her voice soft. Thank you, Mike. I know this isn't your fight, but thank you. Mike gave her a small nod. Don't mention it. Just stay safe, all right. With that, he slipped out the door, leaving Joseph and Ist alone. Joseph returned to the communicator, his fingers flying over the controls as he worked to patch into the city's satellite network. Ist watched him, a mixture of admiration and worry in her eyes. You're taking a huge risk, Joseph. I don't want you to get hurt because of me, she murmured. He glanced up, offering her a reassuring smile. I've been playing it safe my whole life, Ist. It's time I did something that actually matters. The communicator crackled to life, and Joseph held his breath as he waited for a response. Moments later, a faint voice came through the static. This is Alliance Command. Identify yourself and state your purpose. Joseph's heart raced. This is Joseph Freeman, transmitting from Earth. We have an unauthorized incursion by Lord Zorg. He's violated Alliance protocols by entering a restricted zone to capture a fugitive. We need immediate assistance. There was a long pause before the voice returned, this time sharper. Repeat that. Did you say Lord Zorg is on Earth? Yes, he's threatening to destroy the city if we don't hand over his target. We need backup now. The voice on the other end hesitated, and Joseph's stomach twisted. If they refused to help, there would be no one left to stop Zorg. Understood, Mr. Freeman. We'll dispatch a team to investigate, but it will take time. Do what you can to keep the situation contained until then. The transmission cut off, leaving Joseph and Ist in a tense silence. They had reached the Alliance, but help was hours away, if it even arrived in time. Ist took a deep breath, her gaze steely. We'll have to be ready for him ourselves. There's no telling how far Zorg will go to get what he wants. Joseph nodded, a grim determination settling over him. Then let's make it as hard as possible for him. They quickly began fortifying the apartment, blocking windows and setting up makeshift defenses with whatever they could find. Every creak and groan of the building set their nerves on edge as they worked in silence, their shared purpose binding them in a way neither had expected. As they finished, Ist looked around at their makeshift defenses, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It's not much, but I've fought with less. Joseph chuckled, his spirits lifted by her resilience. Stick with me, and we'll make it through this. I promise. But as the ominous hum of Zorg's ship grew louder, their momentary peace was shattered. They had prepared as best they could, but nothing could stop the wave of dread that filled the room as the door rattled under a heavy blow. The battle had found them. The confrontation begins. The relentless pounding on the door made it clear. There was no more time to prepare, no more room to run. Ist and Joseph exchanged a look, their resolve stealing in that single glance. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. Joseph motioned for Ist to stay back, picking up a makeshift weapon, a heavy wrench he'd grabbed from his toolbox. It felt flimsy compared to what they might face, but it was better than nothing. The door shuddered under another blow. Then, with a loud crash, it burst open, revealing two imposing figures. They were tall, their bodies clad in dark, alien armor that glistened with an otherworldly sheen. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, scanning the room until they locked onto Ist. There she is, one of them sneered, his voice grating and mechanical. Lord Zorg sends his regards, fugitive. Joseph stepped forward, trying to hide his trembling hand. She's not going anywhere with you, not without a fight. The guard laughed, his gaze shifting to Joseph. Brave words for a human. Do you even know who you're standing against? I know enough, Joseph replied, his voice steady. I know that you're nothing more than Zorg's lackeys. You think you're invincible, but you're just tools he'll discard when you're no longer useful. The alien's face twisted in anger, and he took a step toward Joseph, raising a menacing weapon that glowed with a strange blue light. I'll enjoy teaching you some respect. Without hesitation, Joseph swung the wrench, aiming for the alien's head. The guard ducked, but the movement allowed Ist to spring into action. With a swift motion, she landed a sharp blow to the guard's side, causing him to stumble backward. Her eyes burned with a fierce determination, a reminder of the fighter she once was. The second guard lunged toward her, and she dodged skillfully, using her agility to evade his attacks. Joseph seized the opportunity, diving at the first guard again. This time, he managed to strike a solid blow to the alien's arm, knocking his weapon out of reach. But the guard retaliated with a swift punch that sent Joseph sprawling to the floor. Pain radiated through Joseph's side, but he forced himself up, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. Is that all you've got? He taunted, hoping to distract them long enough for Ist to make her move. Ist's expression hardened, and she struck the second guard with a series of quick, precise hits, her movements a blend of grace and deadly accuracy. In moments, she had the guard disarmed, his weapon clattering to the floor as he staggered back, clutching his side. But before she could land another blow, a voice echoed through the apartment, a voice that froze her in place. Well, well, the voice drawled, smooth and venomous. It seems my property has learned some new tricks. Joseph looked up to see a holographic projection flicker to life in the center of the room. There, in towering detail, was Zorg himself. His pale, narrow face was twisted into a cruel smile, his eyes gleaming with malice. Though it was only an image, his presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Lord Zorg, Ist said, her voice tight with barely contained fury. Zorg chuckled, his gaze flicking from Ist to Joseph with disdain. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Istara. Did you think you could run from me forever? Ist's jaw clenched. I'm not your property, Zorg. Not anymore. Oh, but you are, he replied smoothly, as if discussing a trivial matter. You were born to serve me, to do as I command, and you know as well as I do that you cannot escape that. Joseph took a step forward, his voice defiant. She's not yours, and she never will be. I don't care what twisted claims you think you have. Zorg's gaze narrowed, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. And who are you, little human, to challenge me? Do you think your fragile body and petty defiance will make a difference? Joseph clenched his fists. I don't have to be invincible. I just have to be willing to stand up to you. Zorg's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. Very well. If you won't hand her over, then you'll both pay the price. With a flick of his hand, the hologram vanished, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The guards, now back on their feet, advanced with renewed aggression. Joseph and Ist exchanged a quick glance, silently agreeing that their only option was to fight. As the guards closed in, Joseph dodged a heavy blow and swung his wrench with all his strength, connecting with the guard's leg. The alien staggered, and Ist took advantage of the moment, delivering a powerful kick to the guard's head, sending him crashing into the wall. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. The second guard lunged at Ist, but Joseph intercepted, managing to wrestle him to the ground. The guard snarled, struggling beneath Joseph's grip, but Joseph held on, refusing to let go. Ist quickly moved in, disarming the guard and knocking him out with a precise blow to the back of the head. For a moment, they stood in silence, breathing heavily as they surveyed the damage. The two guards lay unconscious on the floor, but they both knew this was only a temporary victory. Ist looked at Joseph, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, an unspoken bond that had formed between them in the heat of battle. Thank you, Joseph. I don't know how I could ever repay you. Joseph shrugged, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. We're not done yet. And anyway, this is as much about me standing up to bullies as it is about protecting you. Ist's lips quirked into a faint smile. Then I'm glad we're in this together. A sudden high-pitched beeping interrupted them, coming from the guard's fallen weapons. Joseph crouched down, examining the device strapped to one guard's wrist. His eyes widened as he realized what it was. It's a tracker, he said, his voice tense. They knew exactly where to find you, Ist. This thing must have been active the whole time. Ist's face paled. Then Zorg knows we're here. We have to move before he sends more of them. Joseph nodded, quickly gathering their limited supplies. They couldn't stay in the apartment. It was only a matter of time before Zorg's forces closed in again. He grabbed his communicator, hoping the Alliance was still on their way. They slipped out of the apartment, making their way through the back alleys of New Chicago. The city was eerily quiet, the usual bustling crowds replaced by an oppressive silence as people hid indoors, fearing the alien presence in their skies. As they moved, Ist looked at Joseph, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you doing this for me, Joseph? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. He glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. Maybe I don't know you well, but I know enough. I know that you deserve to be free, just like anyone else. And maybe I just want to prove to myself that there's still some good left in this world. Ist looked away, her expression conflicted. She had spent her life being told that she was nothing more than a tool, a weapon in Zorg's arsenal. Yet here was a human, willing to risk everything for her freedom, a stranger, now her closest ally. They reached an abandoned warehouse near the edge of the city, slipping inside and barricading the doors. Joseph set up his communicator again, his fingers shaking slightly as he keyed in the emergency signal. They needed the Alliance now more than ever. Just as the signal connected, a booming voice filled the warehouse, amplified by speakers on Zorg's ship hovering above. Enough games, Istara. Surrender yourself, or I will level this entire city. Joseph's heart pounded as he met Ist's gaze. He's bluffing, right? He wouldn't destroy a whole city, just to get to you. Ist's face was pale, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know Zorg like I do." He would. Joseph took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. They were running out of options, and their only hope was that the Alliance would reach them in time. But as the rumbling of Zorg's ship grew louder, Joseph knew they might have to make a stand, one last desperate attempt to defy the tyrant who thought he could control them. The fight was far from over, and Joseph and Ist would face it together, no matter the cost. The battle for freedom. The warehouse was quiet, save for the faint hum of Zorg's ship hovering ominously above. Each creak of the building seemed amplified, each shadow an unknown threat. Ist and Joseph crouched behind a stack of crates, their breaths shallow as they tried to formulate a plan. The threat of total annihilation loomed above them, but neither of them was ready to give up. "We can't keep running, Joseph," Ist murmured, her voice filled with grim determination. "Zorg has made it clear he won't stop until he has me. He'd sacrifice his entire city just to make an example." Joseph's jaw clenched. "Then we need to make sure he's the one who gets a lesson. If we can't escape, we'll stand and fight." Ist looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You're willing to risk everything for someone you barely know." Joseph met her gaze, his voice steady. "You're not just someone, Ist. You're someone worth fighting for. And I don't plan on letting Zorg destroy everything just to satisfy his ego." Ist nodded, a glint of hope returning to her eyes. "Then let's make it count." The distant whine of engines grew louder, and they both knew that more of Zorg's forces were closing in on their location. Joseph quickly checked his communicator, hoping for an update from the Alliance. Static crackled, and then a faint voice broke through. "This is Alliance Command. We're en route to your coordinates, but the warp zone is heavily monitored. Expect delay." Joseph's heart sank. They couldn't afford a delay. "Understood. Just get here as fast as you can," he responded, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. He looked at Ist, who was examining the guards' weapons they had brought with them. She turned one over in her hands, her fingers tracing the intricate alien design. "These are plasma-based," she said, studying them intently. "Not exactly Earth-friendly, but we can make them work. They have a short burst mode and a charged shot. Use the short bursts if you want speed, and the charged shot if you're aiming for impact." Joseph nodded, accepting the weapon Ist handed him. He felt a shiver of trepidation, but her confidence gave him strength. They had a fighting chance, however small. A loud crash echoed from the entrance of the warehouse. Heavy footsteps resonated, and the familiar armored figures of Zorg's guards filed in, their weapons at the ready. Joseph and Ist stayed low, waiting for the right moment. The first guard advanced, his weapon trained on their hiding spot. Joseph's grip tightened on his plasma gun, his mind racing as he calculated their next move. He glanced at Ist, who nodded in silent agreement. On his signal, they sprang from behind the crates, firing with everything they had. The warehouse erupted in a chaotic firefight. Plasma bolts illuminated the shadows as Joseph and Ist dodged between cover, their movements coordinated and precise. Ist moved with a lethal grace, her years of training evident in every step. She shot down 2 guards with swift, calculated precision, her face a mask of focus. Joseph felt the adrenaline surge through him as he fired at an advancing guard, the plasma burst hitting its mark. The guard staggered, and Joseph seized the opportunity, delivering a well-aimed kick that sent him sprawling to the ground. "Keep moving," Ist shouted, gesturing toward a stack of barrels near the back of the warehouse. "We need to separate them, make it harder for them to focus on us." They weaved through the maze of crates and barrels, staying just out of reach as the guards regrouped. The tension was thick, and every step felt like a gamble. One wrong move, and they would be caught in a hail of plasma fire. As they reached a small alcove in the corner of the warehouse, Ist turned to Joseph, her breathing ragged but her eyes sharp. "We're doing well, but we need to take out the commander. He's the one directing them." Joseph nodded, understanding the urgency. He peered out from behind their cover, spotting the commander, a hulking figure with elaborate armor that marked him as a leader. He was barking orders, his voice harsh and unyielding. "I'll distract him. You get a clear shot," Joseph whispered, gripping his weapon tightly. Before Ist could protest, Joseph stepped out from their cover, firing a series of rapid bursts toward the guards near the commander. The shots scattered the soldiers, drawing their attention as they returned fire. "Over here, you ugly goons," Joseph shouted, dodging behind a pile of crates just as a barrage of plasma bolts seared through the air where he had stood. The commander snarled, his gaze fixed on Joseph. "You think you can stand against the might of Zorg's army, human? Pathetic." Joseph clenched his teeth, refusing to back down. "I think you're a coward, hiding behind all that armor. Why don't you try fighting me yourself?" The commander's face contorted with rage, and he stepped forward, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, Ist appeared from behind him, moving with silent precision. In one swift motion, she drove her plasma blade into a weak spot in his armor. The commander let out a choked gasp, his weapon falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. Joseph joined Ist, his face breaking into a relieved grin. "Nice work." She gave a brief nod, but their victory was short-lived. More guards poured into the warehouse, the reinforcements looking more determined than ever. "We're outnumbered," Ist said, her voice laced with frustration. "We can't keep this up much longer." Just then, a sudden rumble shook the ground beneath them. Joseph looked up, his heart racing as he saw the familiar shape of an Alliance ship descending outside the warehouse. "The Alliance? They are here," he exclaimed, hope surging through him. The guards, noticing the arrival of the Alliance forces, hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. In that moment of distraction, Joseph and Ist seized the opportunity, launching a final assault that sent the remaining guards into retreat. The warehouse doors burst open as a team of Alliance soldiers stormed in, their sleek uniforms and advanced weaponry a stark contrast to Zorg's guards. The lead soldier approached Joseph and Ist, nodding in approval. "Nice work. We received your distress signal. Zorg's forces are withdrawing, but he's still on his ship. Our team is preparing to board and apprehend him." Ist's face hardened. "I want to be there when you confront him. I need to face him one last time." The Alliance officer studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but we'll need to move quickly." As they made their way to the landing area, Joseph stayed close to Ist, sensing the weight of what lay ahead. The Alliance ship loomed before them, its hatch open and ready to transport them to Zorg's vessel. The journey was brief, the tension in the air palpable as they approached their final confrontation. When they docked on Zorg's ship, they were met with little resistance. The remaining guards seemed to have fled, abandoning their posts in the face of the Alliance's firepower. They moved swiftly through the cold, metallic corridors, finally arriving at the ship's command center. There, standing before the massive viewport, was Zorg himself, his back turned as he watched the planet below. The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the ship's engines. Ist stepped forward, her voice steady. "It's over, Zorg. You're finished." Zorg turned slowly, his face twisted into a sneer. "You dare to defy me, Istara? After all I've given you, after all I've made you." Ist's gaze was cold. "You gave me nothing but chains, and I'm breaking them now." Zorg's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "You think these weaklings can protect you? I am the master of worlds. No one defies me and lives to tell the tale." Joseph stepped beside Ist, his voice unwavering. "There's a first time for everything." Zorg's sneer faded, replaced by a look of pure malice. "Then you will both die as fools." He lunged toward them, his movements swift and deadly. But Ist was ready. With a fierce battle cry, she raised her plasma blade, meeting his attack head-on. The room erupted into chaos as they clashed, sparks flying from each blow. Joseph joined the fray, using his weapon to fend off Zorg's relentless strikes. The Tyrant was powerful, but Ist's resolve was stronger. Together, they pressed him back, their movements perfectly synchronized as they fought with everything they had. In a final, desperate move, Ist struck a powerful blow to Zorg's chest, sending him stumbling backward. Joseph seized the opportunity, aiming his weapon at the control panel beside Zorg. With a single shot, he overloaded the ship's systems, triggering a cascade of alarms and flashing lights. Zorg, now cornered, looked at them with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This isn't over, he hissed. Ist stepped forward, her voice cold. Yes, it is. With one last strike, she sent Zorg crashing to the floor, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. As the Alliance officers moved in to secure him, Ist turned to Joseph, a faint smile on her lips. We did it. He smiled back, relief flooding through him. Yeah, we really did. Together, they left the command center, the weight of their victory settling over them. They had fought for freedom, not just for Ist, but for everyone who had suffered. The aftermath and new beginnings. The heavy thrum of the Alliance ship echoed in the silence as it began its ascent, leaving Zorg's menacing vessel behind. Joseph and Ist stood together at the viewport, watching as the city of New Chicago shrank beneath them, the familiar skyline fading into a distant memory. The gravity of their victory slowly settled over them, mingling with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Ist's violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she took in the sight. I never thought I'd escape. For so long, I thought I was trapped in a life I didn't choose. Joseph turned to her, a soft smile breaking through the gravity of the moment. You're free now, Ist. You've reclaimed your life. That's something to celebrate. She met his gaze, a flicker of hope dancing in her eyes. And you? You risked everything for me. I don't know how to repay that. Joseph shrugged, his expression earnest. You don't have to repay anything. I did it because I wanted to. You deserve to be free, just like anyone else. As the ship settled into orbit, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, securing the vessel and preparing to debrief. Joseph felt a rush of energy course through him, a sense of purpose igniting within. He had gone from an ordinary mechanic to a key player in a galactic confrontation, and now he was part of something much larger than himself. But as they exited the ship, heading toward the main deck, a sudden thought struck him. What happens now, Ist? With Zorg gone, what does that mean for you? She paused, her brow furrowed. I don't know. The Alliance will want to question me, to understand what happened. But after that, I have no idea what my future holds. Joseph felt a pang of concern. He wanted to offer her something more, but he wasn't sure how to express it. You'll figure it out. You're strong, Ist, and you're not alone anymore. As they reached the command center, they were greeted by the Alliance commander, a stern-looking woman with short-cropped hair and a commanding presence. Istara, she said, nodding at the young woman. Thank you for your bravery. We need to discuss your experience and the intelligence you have regarding Zorg's operations. Ist nodded, her posture stiffening as the reality of her situation settled in. Joseph sensed her apprehension and stepped forward. If she's going to share information, she shouldn't do it alone. I want to be there. The commander's eyes flickered with surprise, then consideration. Very well, but understand, this may be a difficult conversation. As they entered the briefing room, Joseph noticed the high-tech displays lining the walls, charts showing galactic maps and data about Zorg's operations. A chill ran down his spine as the magnitude of the situation became clear. They were dealing with a network of tyranny that extended far beyond Earth. The meeting began, and Ist shared her story. She spoke of her time as Zorg's enforcer, her forced loyalty, and the atrocities she had witnessed. Joseph watched her transform as she spoke. She became more than just a victim. She was a warrior reclaiming her narrative. Zorg manipulated the galactic systems to maintain his power, Ist explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. He used fear to control entire planets, and his reach extended to the farthest corners of known space. I was part of that system, but I didn't see it until I tried to break free. The commander took notes, her expression serious. This is vital information. We can dismantle what remains of Zorg's operations if we act swiftly. His influence is extensive, and there are those who will try to fill the void he's left. Joseph felt a sense of urgency building within him. We can't let that happen. We need to find those still under his control and help them escape. The commander regarded him with newfound respect. You're right, Joseph. The fight isn't over just because Zorg is gone, but we can't do it without proper resources and support. Ist looked at Joseph, her eyes bright with determination. Then let's make sure we have the resources. We've already proven that we can take on Zorg's forces. We can do more together. After the meeting, the commander approached Joseph and Ist as they gathered their thoughts. I want to extend an invitation to both of you. The Alliance needs more people willing to fight against tyranny. Your experiences and skills would be invaluable. Joseph's heart raced at the suggestion. You mean to join the Alliance? To be part of something bigger? The commander nodded. Yes, you've already shown courage and ingenuity. With your combined knowledge and skills, we can create a team that can work to protect others from threats like Zorg. Ist turned to Joseph, her expression filled with hope. This could be our chance to make a real difference, Joseph. We could fight for others who can't fight for themselves. He nodded, feeling a swell of purpose rising within him. Absolutely. I want to help. I want to make sure no one else suffers the way you did. The commander smiled, pleased with their response. Good. I'll arrange for you both to receive training and integrate into our operations. We need fighters, strategists, and those willing to challenge the status quo. As they discussed logistics, Joseph felt a sense of excitement bubbling within him. This was more than just a battle against a single tyrant. It was a call to arms for a cause that resonated deep within his core. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was part of a movement. After the meeting, Ist pulled Joseph aside, her expression serious. Are you sure about this? Joining the Alliance means we'll be facing danger every day. Joseph met her gaze, unwavering. I'd rather face danger with purpose than live in fear without it, and I want to do this with you by my side. Her face softened, and she smiled, the warmth in her eyes melting away the tension that had built up in the room. Thank you for believing in me. I've spent too long doubting myself, but with you, I feel like I can fight back. As the days passed, they began their training with the Alliance. Joseph found himself immersed in new skills, learning combat techniques, tactical planning, and even advanced technology. Each lesson brought him closer to Ist, who excelled in every aspect of training, her natural talent for combat shining through. They spent long hours together, honing their skills, strategizing, and sharing their dreams of a future free from oppression. Joseph found himself inspired by Ist's resilience and determination, and he wanted to protect that spirit at all costs. One evening, after an intense training session, they sat together on a rooftop overlooking the bustling city below, the stars twinkling overhead. The air was filled with the sounds of life, but for Joseph and Ist, it felt like a moment suspended in time. I never thought I could feel this way again, Ist said, her voice soft. After everything that happened, I thought my heart would always be filled with fear. Joseph turned to her, his heart racing. You're stronger than you realize. You've shown me what it means to fight for something greater. You've given me a purpose. Ist smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. And you've given me hope, Joseph. Hope for a future where we can be free. Together. They sat in silence, the bond between them deepening with each passing moment. The night air was crisp, and Joseph felt a sense of peace settle over him, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the stars twinkled above, Joseph made a silent promise to himself to protect Ist and fight alongside her, no matter the cost. Together, they were ready to take on the universe, united by their shared dreams and unyielding spirit. Little did they know, their journey was only just beginning, and the galaxy held both peril and possibility, waiting to be uncovered. They were ready to embrace it all, for they had each other, and together, they would carve out their own destiny.